everybody, and I am back here on the channel. It is the most earth-breaking, ground-shaking, but never media show money-taking, the man, the myth, the legend, the most electrifying YouTuber in YouTube entertainment today, Mr. General Zod, and welcome to the dojo for episode 2 of the Twilight Zone. And this is a deep dissension into madness as I review these. And I'm here to talk about, quite possibly, one of my favorite episodes ever constructed by the Twilight Zone, and my thoughts of the reimagining of that episode. And as I go through these, I'll do a contrast, and I will tell you the episodes and which ones I think that they are mirroring, because a lot of these aren't even original episodes. They're taken from the older Twilight Zone, some of them, and repurposed. I think there was one original one, and that's the last episode, and I'll get to my feelings on that. But in the original one, to give you context, it's about a man who's a writer, and he's on an airplane. He sees a creature on the wing. It is played by the awesome William Shatner, and the performance is just great. Now, if you look at it today, it's a little bit hammy, a little over the top, but there's a subtle charm and a sort of terror that is invoked about this episode, about no one believing this man, and it eventually leads to the downfall of these passengers aboard this plane. Now, the new one makes a redo of this, and it's played by Sean William Scott, I believe is his name. He's a very good actor. He's in a lot of horror stuff. He was also in the movie Brothers. I mean, this guy is a pretty decent actor. And my issues with this episode come in the latter half, but I'll get to that. So, in this telling, he's still a writer, but he's a journalist. And he did some coverage in Iraq. He's got PTSD, and he boards this plane. Now, it's been established in the beginning he already had a mental breakdown, which plays a big part into this episode, into the psychology. Now, I liked aspects of this episode. My problem was I'm a fan of the original, and I had to look at this as a new generation and not coming from my generation of what I grew up with. So if I'm just taking that out of it, and I'm rating this on it essentially being a new episode that no one's ever seen, unless you're a hardcore Twilight Zone fan, you would never know that this was derived from a really great episode, probably one of the best episodes of television in an anthology series. If I took that out of there, okay, the setup is pretty interesting. While he's on this plane, he picks up this iPad, and he listens to it, and it's a documentary about how this flight that he's currently on is going to go missing. So this journalist has to use his skills and figure out what the catalyst is for this flight going missing. And there's minor spoilers in this, so if you have no interest or you already saw this, then that's great. If not, you can click off this video, go check it out, then come back. But anyways, so my issues were not with the way that they tried to do a different take on this. I thought it was interesting. Me and my mom watched this episode together. We thought it was interesting. The thing where this episode falls flat is the very end. And this is going to be a running theme with a good majority of these episodes. They start out very thought-provoking, and there's actually zero politics in this. Maybe some stuff with Russia, maybe some stuff with the Iraq thing, but that was a real thing with reporters. They suffered PTSD being along with the soldiers. There's a lot of that. So the real world fits into this episode. My issue with it is the end of this episode, and that's where I want to focus on. The end of Terra 3,000 feet in the original was essentially that they don't heed William Shatner's warning. The beast or the creature rips off the wing of the plane. It goes down. And if I remember correctly, he opens the door or something like that. He contributes to the overall crash, but they do see the creature. And everyone survives because the plane kind of goes onto water, but no one ever sees the creature. And that's the big, end where, they can't really prove whether or not this thing was on the plane. Now, the thing with this episode is it does a twist that's different. And the twist would have worked except for they went overboard. There's a podcast talking about how everything he does, he seems to be on this podcast. Like, he has an outburst, and then it's mentioned in the thing, and he's trying to put it together before the end of the podcast, because the end of it is the plane going down. The other thing that I liked was he was with this guy who was a former pilot, and then the guy was banned from flights. And he thinks that the pilot that is piloting the plane now is going to be responsible for the crash. So you guys see where this is going. He essentially lets on this crazy guy who essentially winds up crashing the plane. Now, all this is good, except for the very ending. There's a cut to this beach, and he's on the plane. He picks up the iPod, and it says that there's part 2 to this broadcast, and that everyone made it off the plane safely, but he disappeared. And then he's on the island, and all these people come up, and he picks up a rock, and he starts fighting them off, and it's all of the passengers, and they all maul him. Now, in the dialogue, Jordan Peele comes back on and says, the road to hell is paved in good intentions. And his actions directly led to this crazy guy taking over the flight. I got all that. The thing that didn't make sense to me about this episode is that at the very ending, all of these people come up and they attack him, and I'm gathering he's in his own kind of hell. But they don't explain, once again, how he got here. Did he wander off? Did he disappear, wind up dying, and he's the only one who died on this flight? There's a lot of things, once again, they left too much open. And this is a problem that you see narratively throughout this show, is that there is no closure to the main storyline. The original closed out the storyline. The cliffhanger was what came after. Like, for instance, there's an episode in The Twilight Zone, one of the most infamous ones, where this guy goes back in time to World War II, changes events, and then winds up causing the destruction of the world. And when he wakes back up thinking he's changed everything, he's really destroyed everything. And it turns out he's stuck in a repetitive cycle because of one bad choice. And it's kind of playing to the fact that things need to happen in order to cause other events, right? But it closes out his storyline. This guy's storyline is too up in the air. Did he die? Did he not make it? Was he in hell? I mean, this is supposed to be thought-provoking, but it comes off as a way that the writers have a good premise, but they can't end the story. And it's frustrating. This is one of my favorite tales from The Twilight Zone. And everyone highlights this as a good episode, but I feel like they highlight this because they don't know the original material, and they don't realize this is very half-assed ending. That's the best way I can say it. It's a half-assed ending that really isn't an ending. It's just like, if they would have stopped with the guy taking the plane, if they would have cut it right there, that would have been thought-provoking, because I would have been like, oh, this flight was doomed. But they had to put a twist on there. And sometimes the twist is just ending the story where you're at. I was feeling it up to that very end. Like, if I took that whole end scene out, this would have been a perfect episode. I would have said it was better than the original. Unfortunately, this writer goes and adds extra. And extra isn't always good. And this is the problem with writing in general, or with these shows that are written. They try to be too thought-provoking, or the writer feels like they're so creative that they've got to do this thing. And Twilight Zone and the way it was written was simplistic and complex all at once. They didn't have to tack on anything to give you the twist. The twist was in the narrative. This one, it feels like they go, okay, they have this narrative, and then they have to throw in this twist at the end, and you don't if you've got a good story. The twist could be that he was the one who caused the wreck, the crazy guy took over, and then the flight disappeared, and that's the end of the episode. It's like when someone adds on at the end of a horror movie, which I really hate, they add on that, oh, it's almost over, that movie, Escape Room, did like 3 different endings in the same movie. It's just like that. Convoluted writing and access that does not need to be there. And that's where this episode really fails. So overall, what do I think? Seann William Scott, he did a great job. The people in this episode did a great job. It was very well shot. It had a great premise, and it fails at the end. And that's where pretty much almost all of these, except for 2 episodes, some people picked 4. I say there's only 2 episodes that don't mess up the ending. They just leave it ambiguous. And those 2 writers should write the rest of these stories, because these other writers, like, I get it's an anthology series and they bring in different writers, but some of these writers are terrible. It's like from the CBS catalog. So overall, what do I think of this episode? I think this episode is a step above episode 1 in the story. Granted, it's ripped off from another Twilight Zone episode, but I don't think it's better than episode 1 in the way it resolutes the story. I think episode 1's resolution, while it didn't answer all my questions, it closed up enough. As I said in my last review, there were things in that still left open. So, this episode for me is a 6.9. Yes, I know, it's weird, right? And these are going to get lower. I think there's only 2 episodes that go above 7. I think it would have been an 8 or a 9, or hell, even a 10 if they would have just stopped at the ending that they had, instead of adding on a bunch of tacked on crap that didn't need to be there. I mean, and it gets worse from here, because the next couple of episodes that come up are just like so unimpressive. Like I said, my favorite episode of the season is 1. Just 1 episode that, in my mind, is a perfect 10 and reminiscent to what the Twilight Zone was. And I'll get to that episode. And it's an episode that no one else picked out. And they didn't pick it out because they had no politics or no political agenda. And I'll highlight that episode. I believe it's coming up soon. But anyways, this has been my review on episode 2 of the Twilight Zone, Terra at 30,000 feet. If you like this video, hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And as always, remember the only rule here in the fandom zone: kneel before General Zod.